I'm very pleased to welcome to you all to this UNFPA's World Population Day event, a virtual event. The topic is that thinking differently for achieving progress for women and girls in the new normal. And this year is certainly a very special one due to the pandemic situation, and we decided to organize this virtual event. And it's also a very good opportunity for us to reflect what we mean by the women and the girls' rights and dignity and well-being in this particular context. And we welcome you all to this exciting discussion with a wonderful panelist and the moderator.
Now going to be hosting the panel in a slightly unorthodox manner. We have with us Mr. Manjula De Silva, and we also have Dr. Susie Pereira here. We will be moving the camera around as we switch between panelists until we can sort out some of the finer technical issues. I will direct the camera to Dr. Susie to give us a very brief overview of what she was saying.
Yes, thank you. What I mentioned was we actually had two success factors during the previous time, and that was actually the fact that we had a sound public health architecture, the infrastructure in the country, which actually helped us in a very aggressive contact tracing, which actually a lot of countries were not able to do, but we were able to do that. That is because of our public health infrastructure. And the government did impose these restrictions, and that is what really made people behave like this. Now the issue is whether we can continue that kind of a strategy by imposing these restrictions like that, as we did earlier, if we are to experience a second wave. That would be the challenge that we have.
I would like to direct that question to Mr. Manjula De Silva, because we see this rise in work from home, and from a private sector perspective, what do you think we can do to balance this issue?
The way I look at it, I feel working from home became hugely popular during this pandemic. And I see that as one of the few positive outcomes that came out of the crisis. Why I say that is because although people were initially very reluctant to embrace this, over time they began to realize that there were quite a few positives, quite a few benefits coming out of it. At the same time, there are challenges as well. If I start off with the positives, some of them are pretty obvious, like the saving of time and the saving of cost. In addition to that, the ability to work flexible hours when you work from home, I mean, you can adapt it to suit your preference, your lifestyle, and that fitted in with a lot of people, and also particularly focusing on women who play an important role in taking care of a lot of others. I mean, they found it easier to balance that, because while you work, I mean, you can always take a few minutes off to go around and see what's happening in the house. Anyway, even if you work in offices, you will take a little break from time to time. A lot of people found it very useful, and they were able to achieve a very healthy kind of work-life balance during this period. And I find that many of them would like to continue going that way in the new normal, as we like to call it.
So far, what we have been discussing is that, okay, so in the context of Sri Lanka, we had a fairly severe and quite restrictive lockdown that was put in place, which had some implications on women and girls' rights, their access to healthcare, their access to services, access to things like contraception, which would have very long-term consequences on health and well-being. And in addition to that, we have had from Mr. Manjula De Silva the private sector perspective on how work from home could be seen as a positive. I will come back to that later on in the discussion, because I think there's a lot of scope for opportunity and reform, so that we can take advantage of this situation while also making sure that women aren't placed in a position of disadvantage or vulnerability. But Mr. Myra, what I would like to direct to you is to draw on your expertise. Given that we would probably have a fairly short time frame in which we could action these policies, these ideas, these reforms, how could we best approach it? Drawing from international experience, how could we best approach it to bring about change that is cross-cutting, that isn't going to exist in a silo, that isn't going to disappear in a couple of months? We would love to hear your thoughts on this.
You mentioned yesterday when we were all checking in about what's going on in Sri Lanka, and it's the same pattern everywhere, that we have a health crisis, fighting a virus we don't know much about. So we are looking for bold, tough solutions to prevent the virus getting much worse. And therefore the lockdown and all the challenges of the lockdown, whether it's legally permissible is one aspect, but the consequences of the lockdown on other aspects of people's lives, their ability to get their essential supplies, their ability to keep at work and to earn. This is playing out everywhere, whether it's rich California or it is the poorest parts of India and in between Sri Lanka. It's the same set of challenges. And the point is that they all interact with each other. You cannot solve just the health problem, because as you solve the health problem, you're making people, even health-wise, worse off for other diseases. For example, even in California, people with other diseases than COVID are not finding easy admission to hospitals and access to doctors, just like in my country. So they may be saved from COVID, but they'll die anyway of other problems. And in poorer countries like many parts of my country, in India, if they don't have enough money to buy food, they will die of starvation. And children, of course, their lives getting affected by malnutrition and they grow up stunted. And then the education problem too, that you have to shut down the schools, but the children don't go to schools. The education is disrupted, so the growth of the minds and the bodies of children is also getting disrupted. So, we must manage many problems simultaneously. That's the main thing. How do you get many experts in many different fields to put their minds together to think of the system as a whole, rather than solving their part of the problem? So this has become very evident all around the world that we are not used to solving complex problems in which many angles must be addressed simultaneously. Systems thinking means think of many things, all things together at one time, and don't break them into parts. We are realizing in the pandemic that this is the missing governance ability.
So now we have with us our two panelists in person, Dr. Susie and Mr. Manjula De Silva, and we also have Ms. Mukta Tuigama online with us. So Ms. Mukta Tuigama, I'd like to direct this question to you. So drawing on the conversations we've had so far, we've had an overview of what's happening in Sri Lanka, both from the public health perspective and from private sector work perspective. And now keeping in mind what Mr. Myra has brought to the table in terms of the systemic thinking, how does a rights framework kind of fit into this, and how can we include that in our approach as we think of how we deal with these issues that we're probably going to have to face again over the next few months?
At one level, from a rights framework point of view, inclusivity, consultation are extremely important aspects of regulation. Same time, a pandemic requires that you need to move fast, be effective, and control. So you're constantly juggling these two interests. I think the problem is in terms of information rather than a legal framework. It's very important. We have an amazing public health service. We have an amazing series of officials who have managed public health crises on many occasions. We have a fantastic police service who's able to manage people's fears and communicate it.
And on that note, I'd like to close today's panel. Huge thank you goes out to our panelists today. They have been very accommodating of many technical issues. Dr. Susie Pereira, Mr. Manjulo De Silva, thank you so much. Ms. Muthetuegama and Mr. Arun Maira, they're not online right now, but I thank them for taking the time out of busy schedules and accommodating us and sharing with us very action-oriented, positive hope. I mean, at the end of this panel, I'm positive that we can see some change, we can see some opportunity for reform in the future. And last but definitely not least, thank you for our audience for sticking with us, for engaging and answering the polls. It was much appreciated, and we look forward to feedback from you all.